So, welcome back to Chasing the Dream, a podcast on culture creation and how to build amazing workplace cultures. And I'm Ethan Chazin, and I am excited to today have one of my favorite people in the whole wide world joining us. So, without further ado, I'm going to dive right in. Meg says hi. Ladies and gentlemen, Meg Schitz is a franchise consultant and a business owner and an employer, and she's been self-employed since she left the corporate job back in 1993. That she's kind enough to share that's been 30 years for anybody who's counting. And she's almost as passionate as I am about corporate warriors and refugees having the opportunity to seek self-employment, and in her case, researching business investment and diversification options that provide freedom and financial reward outside of a career. So Meg, welcome to Chasing the Dream.
I can't wait. I'm so excited we're here finally.
Finally, we've been talking forever about this, so the day has come. I mean, to the folks who aren't aware of all of that. But so I wanted to dive right into the deep end of the pool and see if there's water there and ask you, from your perspective, your experience, or the formative reason why you've decided to pursue this thing for, as you said, 3 decades plus in terms of self-determination around, finding your own career and transitioning to franchising perhaps, and all of your experiences that led up to you making that decision.
So, to encapsulate this, more than 30 years ago, my husband at the time went to a franchise expo and came home and said, well, I've always wanted to own a business, but with franchising, it's really easy. You flip on the lights and unlock the door and you're making money. And I said, well, that sounds too good to be true. A little too easy, maybe. And sure enough, about 6 months after we got our first location open, he was ready to quit. It was too much work. And I really thought, since it was his thing, that he would have a little bit more stick to itiveness than that. But I'm a terrier. I jumped in, I figured out how to make the business go. And so I realized at a pretty young age, I think I was 30 at the time, that owning my own business, managing my own hours, managing a staff, it gave me the opportunity to create my own culture. And I really wasn't happy in my job. So that was really the genesis of, oh my gosh, there's life outside of corporate America. Look at that.
Mhm.
It started to take off then once I took over. And so never looking back, it's been all franchising for me because that's a lane and a path that I'm very good at following the recipe.
So, there's something that I've wanted to ask you for a long time. So the idea of franchising, right, is you decide which franchise brand business suits you and your background and your values and all that stuff. But as you said, you inherit something that's been created. How do you, one, do that and yet apply your experience before you went the route of franchising in terms of places you've worked to create a culture within that kind of pre-existing brand, if that makes any sense?
And the reason that it makes sense is once you own it, whatever the franchise is, and most people think about food, but it's so much broader than that. You're buying the recipe for success. And as long as you execute it, then you will realize the dream of making money. The important distinction then is that you own that culture. You are required to hire employees. You've got customers coming in the door. So there are certain elements of business. You've got a consumer and you've got a deliverable. And so the way that you create your own culture really is how you treat your employees. Recruiting is one thing. That's just one little bit of it. It's the retention. That's where your culture comes from. That's where your own personal fingerprint of how you're going to pay people, treat people, recognize and appreciate and promote. That's all you.
And to follow on that thought process, so I'd be keen on knowing, I'm sure our audience would as well, what was formative for you in terms of your experiences that predated choosing the path of franchising around how you treat people, how you recruit people, what you look for in people, and then how you kind of take those lessons learned and apply it to your own journey as far as creating culture.
I grew up in a household where my mother was a hospice nurse and my father was a surgeon. And so care and compassion is part of my genetic code. So let's start with that. Going through the motions of being an employee and realizing, like so many of your clients and so many of mine as well, in the corporate world, you're in a silo. You have a job description, you have responsibilities. You're kept very tightly on that rein of what the production is supposed to be. And so when I talk to people and realize this about myself as a business owner, there was so much more to me that was not being realized in the job. So I take not only the upbringing and experiences that I had as a high schooler and my first jobs in high school as a college student, putting myself through college to some extent, and fitting into then Meg's world, taking those experiences and fitting them into my world. I was so excited when I got the opportunity to be an employer and put my own stamp on these people and recognize and appreciate them in ways that I never had been.
Can we talk more about that? The Meg's world, and obviously, well, not obviously, but you and I have talked a lot about your upbringing in terms of being of service and being empathetic and helping others. How do you kind of take that piece of your world and your upbringing, and then how do you apply that to looking for the right people who fit into that model, but yet knowing that you've already got a business model, a framework called the franchise, but how do you kind of handle the people side of this?
In the beginning, Ethan, I don't think I've ever confessed this to you, but I was an absolute doormat. I was so nice and I wanted to be liked and I wanted people to come and work for me because I was just better. But I didn't really have anything to show. I didn't have proof of why working for me was better. I was just nice. Well, when you're nice, then people will take advantage of you. And the lesson in life for me was that with my first business, we were bleeding to death financially. And I didn't understand why. This is 30 years ago. We didn't have cameras and intelligent software programs to check people in and out. It was really easy to open the drawer, grab $100 and call it your own. And so that was my first lesson was people will take advantage of you. If you're just that nice, as I learned more about the real benefit of a franchise, and I went back to them for my own training, how do I become a better employer? They're really the ones who helped me realize that being nice and just being myself was really important, but to have guidelines and rules and structure and to call people out when they're out of line. Ethan, at that point, I think I was a mother of a 1.5, 2-year-old. So it's not like I had a whole lot of experience. Also, when I was employed in the corporate world, I had no direct reports.
Wow.
Key, owning your own business the first time with no experience managing another person, that was trial by fire for me. So it did take me a good 18 months to hit my stride and then garner the trust of my employees and turn them into longtime banner waving, Meg loving fans. But it did take a good 18 months.
And as far as kind of the narrative arc of your own personal journey throughout your career, I'm always fascinated with how you went from the initial kind of immersion in franchising to how it evolved to be something that was so ideal for what you needed and wanted, and how does it continue to perpetuate in terms of being this thing that fulfills you, because it's not for everybody.
Correct. I have always been, always, you can ask my mother from the minute I popped out, I've always been very much a rule follower. It doesn't mean that I'm not creative or I'm not entrepreneurial. I am. But where I have succeeded is taking somebody else's proven recipe. And I make this joke all the time that if you want a good German chocolate cake, don't send me to the grocery store and try to figure out what ingredients to buy. Give me the freaking recipe card and it'll be awesome. That's me. I like structure. I want to succeed. I want the shortest path to making money. And because money solves the money problem. When in business as an entrepreneur, it can take a long, long time to figure out what is your lane and how do you price it and how do you market yourself. And I don't want to deal with all that. I like here's the rule book, execute it. I'm excellent at that.
And you and I have talked a lot about that, and I know you are, and I've seen it. We've talked a lot. In fact, you brought me on your program, your podcast, and we've talked about that. But I guess my question is for those who are sitting here, maybe saying, you know what, I've been in corporate America, or I've been working for other people my whole career, and what she's saying is resonating, but how do I know if this is right for me? How do you kind of walk people through the decision-making process that you went through to determine if that structure and that pre-existing model framework works for them, but knowing that they're going to have to buy into the culture of that
Yeah.
brand? And then how do they build that out by going back and bringing people in to fit what they're trying to do?
So the answer to all of this is I have a process. In the first conversation, tell me about you. Tell me about your flight of the bumblebee. Tell me the things that you can't put in your resume or on your LinkedIn that are intimate to you and in becoming who you are today. And with that opening, I got a lot of people who will volunteer details of their life that let me know if they're entrepreneurial and open to owning a business, or if they're really much more, I would say, uh, geared to be an employee that's perfect for them every day. They like that security and they don't feel the need to branch out from there. I'm looking for people who do want to branch out from there, who know that at any point, and you've been a victim of this, that pink slip can come any day, anytime, and there's no allegiance with an employer. So to me, as now a highly diversified business owner, not just franchising, my husband and I've got a lot of other businesses that are independent. Diversification is your safety net to having that plug pulled and you getting back in the grind of having to find another job. But it's not for everybody. Being a business owner takes I was going to say courage, but it takes courage to do a lot of things.
Mhm.
It takes a certain element of risk tolerance. So, Ethan, when I'm working with somebody, the first conversation is tell me about who you are and where did you pollinate that flight of the bumblebee so I can get an idea of who they are. If it seems like they're really geared towards business ownership, and yeah, I've always dreamed about it, or gosh, I've never really thought about it, but Meg, what you're saying really makes sense. Great. Then we start to peel the layers back to find out, are they super structured? Are they kind of structured? Are they not structured at all? I talked to a gentleman last week who's totally an entrepreneur and an inventor. I wouldn't for my life try to convince him that owning a franchise is the right thing.
Hmm.
He needs to carve his own path. He's done it before. He's never monetized it, but at age 62, it's what he knows and it is who he is. I've got other people who've never considered it or have had this little voice in the back of their head. I wonder if I could keep my job and diversify and own my own business. In franchising, the answer is yes. So let's have a conversation and see if there is a fit. But you know me, I'm a truth teller. If it's not the right fit, then we shut it down and move on.
Right. And I love this kind of way to have formal structural clarity that when you do the needs assessment with the individual, you start with the getting to know them and their kind of flight of the bumblebee and their kind of career trajectory. But I guess my curiosity is once you have identified that they're predisposed or they're the personality that lends itself to that structure, and they say, yep, Meg, franchising. I've heard everything you said. It makes sense. Is there any conversation around, okay, we now know that this is a viable path for you, but now we have to figure out what the right
Oh, yeah.
franchise is in? And do you ever talk, because I'm sure that there are business considerations around which type, but do you ever get to a conversation around the match between the individual's value system and the brand itself? Is there any kind of humanistic, and can you talk about that?
So just to frame it for the listener, I describe myself as that mix of an executive recruiter, a dating specialist, a family therapist, because there's a family dynamic here. Your wife, your life, and your money go into deciding if going into business for yourself is really for you. So I'm very much on the human side of, let's pull this apart. Who are you? What makes you tick? What skills do you want to use? What are some of those latent skills that you haven't been using in your current role? Are you an artist? Are you an athlete? Tell me about that person I don't know, because you're not going to put it on your resume, but tell me who you are and what makes you tick. Then, as we're talking about who they are and what makes them tick, then I'll start to throw out different industries and say, based on what you're saying, I could see you fitting into this particular industry segment, or residential cleaning. I could see, based on your interest in cars, what about the automotive segment? Or, gosh, people who are into fitness, yoga. I love yoga. Well, if I gave you a fitness opportunity that was in yoga and you owned it, would it live in here 24/7, and it would completely disrupt your passion and what nourishes your soul? I'm not going to have you get into something that's going to be soul crushing. I want you to be financially rewarded and have it fit in with what is already working in your life. So the human element of this is, the short answer is, it takes hours and hours of conversation before I have a really good idea of what direction we're going to go in. Like a good matchmaker or a good executive recruiter, I don't just throw it out there and say, oh, here, Heinz Kraft is hiring. Good luck with that.
Right.
That's not valuable at all. What I'm looking to bring is that really finely woven silk scarf that takes hours and hours to put together the right combination. And even then, it's not a foregone conclusion that that's the right fit. I give them 4 or 6 or 8 different ideas to at least kick tires on, and then start to really drill into, okay, now fact-based. What works? Why do you like it? Why don't you like it? So it becomes a very intelligent decision, not an emotional decision.
But I love how the conversation, the therapy session, the having them sit on the proverbial couch with you is a personal conversation at first, and a very kind of meaningful get to understand them. And then as you progress, you start to come up with ideas that seem to be a match, and then you kind of vet them somewhat objectively. I kind of like that. I guess my curiosity is about you. And because you and I have talked a whole bunch, but we've never talked about kind of now as we head into 2024, your passion is obviously this. And I've always witnessed you being most fulfilled when you're doing this for people. Where do you see Meg Schmitz, and where do you see your franchising and your business opportunities kind of evolve next year and beyond?
I am having lunch right after this with my behind the scenes queen. She's the one who helps me formulate my outreach, whether that's social media or with whom am I going to try to create relationships in the new year, who might be a referral source, who might be a business partner for me to align with. So I spend a lot of time thinking through the different strategies of where to spend my time as well as my money in building my business. And I'll be frank, I don't do annual planning. I am on this rolling week over week strategy of, let's take note of what's not working, or let's take note of all of a sudden what is working.
Exactly.
So I have tried to be that structured, but I have found over the years, when you get a 9/11 or a pandemic, or you get an economic whammy of 2008 that lasted 3 years, you better be able to tap dance and pivot and not get hung up on any one thing. And this is why I also believe in franchising as a diversification strategy. If you get stuck on the one thing, then you're left high and dry. So I'm looking at 2024. Frankly, I'm having a kick-ass 2023.
Yeah,
You and I haven't talked about that, but I surpassed my revenue goal, or at least I hit my revenue goal. I don't know, I'm maybe over it like by an inch,
Mhm.
but that was really rewarding after a really tough 2020. 2021 wasn't a whole lot better, and 2022 was also a rebuilding year. So I think for people who are listening to this and you're wondering what's taking so long, we're all wondering what's taking so long. But if you don't try to eat the elephant all in one bite and you're more thoughtful about piece by piece, then you'll get to your goals. And that's what I'm going to do with 2024. Some of what worked in 2023, I'm going to carry over, but not everything. Some things are dwindling or fading out already.
So question, as you talk about, I'm hearing you talking about being more strategic in your relationship cultivation. And I'm curious how you bring people into the fold, into your world, who match your passion, your values for partnering and working together in these mutually beneficial relationships. Like, how do you tackle that, knowing that you and I met
Yeah, I was
online
going
during
to say,
COVID and did a lot of commiserating and a lot of talking about our businesses weren't kind of, growing the way we envisioned, but having to make adjustments. So how do you plan on cultivating those relationships with the right people as strategic partners?
I'm a firm believer that everyone's got a story. And if you'll just lean in and listen and ask a couple of good open ended questions, people will talk about themselves. They like to talk about what has worked or their successes. They like to talk about what hasn't worked or how they're miserable and want to change or upset about the way that things are going. And so the better a listener I am, then the more trust is developed because people will talk about themselves. I find with LinkedIn, and I was challenged by another friend of mine, also someone I met via LinkedIn during the pandemic. She lives in Washington, D.C. I'm in the Midwest, so not like we were next door neighbors and could share a cup of coffee. That's how Misty and I created our dynamic. It's the same way that you and I did. We talked and we shared and we listened. And it's not a cold call, it's not a cold introduction. When you actually read all the way through somebody's LinkedIn profile to find out who are they really?
Mhm.
Where the flight of the bumblebee? What are they willing to share on LinkedIn that makes them fall into that seven, what is it, 6 degrees of separation, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? We're all
Mhm.
connected in some way, but you have to take the time to do the research in order to bring it into the human realm and not just, hey, so you're an executive recruiter, what do you think about sending your candidates my way? That
Yeah.
doesn't ever work for anything. You have to really warm it up and be thoughtful about creating a trusting dialogue.
And so to that point, building the right relationships by cultivating the right people who you bring into your fold. If somebody heard a lot of what we're talking about today and said, I really want to join her tribe or kind of join her kind of group of like-minded people, how would people get in touch with you? I mean, obviously, I'll put the link to your website and your LinkedIn profile down below, but what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and say, I want to join your world?
You know what freaks people out is when I give my phone number and say, just send me a text and say, oh, I heard you on Ethan's program, 847-302-2601. That it freaks people out that
Time out, time
I would
out.
do that.
Do that again. Do that again. Go ahead, go ahead.
Do which part again?
The number.
847-302-2601. I've got my phone right here. Do you know what's really fun is when someone sends me a text and says, I just heard you on Ethan's program. Can we have a chat? I love that.
I'm hoping that happens quite a bit.
The other way to find me is really my name, Meg Schmitz. My website, it's got blogs and my podcast, and I really try to load information that is useful. I do not sell. I do not convince. I don't push boulders because when you let go of a boulder, it rolls back downhill on you. This is a meaningful dialogue to explore. I'm not going to charge you anything for it. This is just a conversation about, hey, that sounded interesting. Is it the right fit for me? I don't know, and you don't know. So let's pencil it out.
And the greatest relationships all start with a conversation. And what I hope today, selfishly, is bringing other people into this to hear us, because we do this all the time. Maybe they think, I'm at the point in my career where I'd like a new option. I'd like a new path, a journey. And this sounds interesting based on what Meg has said. And I'd like to reach out to her and explore this because, as you alluded to before, I spent 20 years in corporate America, was treated pretty poorly for the duration. It's so empowering to be able to have pretty much complete control over your journey and not answer to other people who don't have your best interest at heart. So, Meg, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your experiences with other people, which you and I have been doing for some time. So thank you for coming on Chasing the Dream.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad we could make it work.
Absolutely.